PhD candidate at Carlo. And she's an RU alumni, so be sure to ask all the questions that you need to know from all these folks, okay? So go ahead and you guys can talk a little bit about, what you do and your career paths, and hopefully these guys have some questions for you. Okay. You take it away. We'll let you take it away.
I'll go first, it's sort of easiest. I'm the director of the counseling center here on campus. I am a clinical social worker, so my graduate degree is master's in social work, and then my postgraduate training was mental health focused and research based. So I've been doing that for like 17 years now, in various different levels of care, whether it's Western Psych or now here. That's my background.
That's short and sweet. Well, that's easy, I guess. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. So I am Karen Brannon, and my title now is Director of Research and Organizational Development, as Stacy said, which is quite a mouthful. And I am responsible primarily for organizational development and family services in Western PA, which is a large human service organization in Allegheny and Westmoreland counties primarily. Some feedback. So what that means is 80% other duties as assigned, and the other 20% is quality management, talent development or learning and development for staff. I have to go through my staff because I forget them all. Compliance, I'm in charge of compliance, all the HIPAA issues and everything like that, all that fun stuff. Program evaluation and outcomes, and also risk management is a big thing for me. I also am in charge of staff recognition at the agency, which I was just telling the group I was talking to sometimes conflicts with that risk management piece. So people either love me or hate me, depending on what I'm setting out that day. And like I said, any other project that gets assigned to me. So right now we're in the middle of revamping our entire performance management process, including hiring, work plans, evaluations, developing a succession plan for the entire organization. And one of those odd ones is we're developing an intranet, so an internal website for our organization, and for some reason I chair that group too. So it's kind of all those other duties as assigned, but I really love that I do something different every day. I could never do the same thing every day. I would just get way too bored. So I love the variety of my job, but it does get overwhelming sometimes. So I welcome any questions about that when we're done.
All right, so as Stacy said, I am an RMU alumni. I graduated in 2012 with social sciences and not psychology, but then I went for a master's degree at Carlo, and I finished that and then decided to go on for my PsyD. So I'm a second year PsyD student at Carlo, and in my free time from that, I work at CHS housing people with either chronic mental illness who can't be in a traditional shelter setting for whatever reason, or they have extensive criminal records, so they can't be like arson or Megan's Law, that kind of stuff. So we house them in housing throughout the city in different neighborhoods. And then on my free time from that, I work at OCA, which is Oliver Citywide Academy. It used to be McKnocker, which is the alternative school in Pittsburgh. So essentially it's about 118 to 20, or 100, yeah, it's probably 120 kids who have been kicked out of the traditional schools in Pittsburgh and are now sent to this. It's kind of like the last stop shop for a lot of children before there's no more options for them in the public education system, which proves to be a whole lot more fun and interesting than what I thought it was going to be. But beyond that, if you have any questions about master's degrees or PsyDs or school counseling or the homeless system, I can answer any of those. So, yeah.
Okay, guys.
For yours, you were talking about risk management. What exactly does that entail with your background?
Actually, I should say it's enterprise risk management, which is different from risk management. So the process that we use is once a year I have every supervise or assess their areas of risk in their organization or their program. And I have spreadsheets that they do that on, so we look at 6 to 8 different categories of risk. So what's the risk for the property? What are the chances of someone falling off a chair in this room? Something as simple as that. We have a lot of agency vehicles, so we do a whole section just on vehicles. vehicle safety. Obviously, if you're out on the road 24 hours a day, there's those chances of accidents and those kinds of things. And so we look at all those different areas. You have all your workers' comp stuff. You have all of your insurances. So if you have licensed clinicians, right, there's insurance that goes along with that. So you have to look at all of that stuff. And you're going to rate them. So we rate them on the level of probability. So what's the likelihood of that particular thing happening? And then what would the impact of that be? Both on it from a human standpoint and the financial standpoint. And that's where the enterprise comes in, is that financial piece. Because you want to see by reducing your risk, then you're actually saving money. And in human services, especially with no state budget yet, every cent counts. So we want to implement things to make sure that our clients are safe, that our staff are safe, and that we're being the most efficient, cost-wise agency that we can be. I don't want to get too much into the insurances and stuff because a lot of that's still over my head, but they look at 7 years. Okay, so when you have a bad year, even 7 years later, it's still impacting you. And the more money you pay out for things that higher your insurance costs are in the agency, I mean, you have to pay for them. And then you run the risk, if you do stupid things, you run the risk of losing that insurance. And then you really can't operate without it, so it can be a struggle. Does that answer your question, or do you have more specifics?
No.
Okay.
It's funny because risk management in my world, so same term, but it's completely different. I chair the behavioral intervention team, otherwise known as the care team on campus. And so risk for our team is evaluating safety behaviors or unsafe behaviors from students. Do insurance or any of that, I can't even imagine adding that on. We have our hands full enough, but trying to keep the university community as safe as possible. And it's not just intervening when there's an active shooter event. It's not this sort of CSI kind of thing. It's a student struggling, failing classes. How can we intervene early to help that student before it gets to a critical mass where there's a real problem?
Right, our goal is really more around prevention. So you're identifying what may happen, and then what can we put in place to make sure it doesn't happen, or at least lessen the impact if it does happen. So there's always risk. Yeah, it's the same idea. There's always risk. You just have to identify how much risk you're willing to take on as an agency. Anytime you hire someone, or anytime you talk with anyone, there's a risk. And you just have to kind of weigh what that is, and somebody else gets to decide if they want to take that risk or not. I just make the recommendations.
And with the student versus one talking about care, are you like assessing like factors that could affect students and then coming and talking with the school on things that we can do to kind of like lower that?
So we look at everything from big picture information about, they have financial reports from students that are struggling to pay off any, balances from their previous year and have high balances. And those kids will be on our radar, not necessarily in and of themselves, but if we hear about them from multiple sources, we know this person's really struggling. And so a member of the team will typically reach out and see if there's anything that we can do to help that student.
Okay, so you three all actually have quite different backgrounds within the field of psychology. I know that you, Karen, your background is industrial psych, correct?
Yes, correct.
And you have your master's in social work, and you're working on your PsyD. So how do you see that differing? And because you guys are probably primarily psychology students, you might not have identified a specific subfield yet, or what you might want to go to grad school for, what you might not even know what different fields are available or types of grad programs that are out there. So what have been your educational experiences, and what kind of led you to make those decisions for yourselves and for your future careers?
Good question. Oh my. For me, I was an undergrad at Pitt, and when it came time to look into graduate programs, honestly, it came down to finances. And when looking at a long-term PhD program, I didn't have that much time not to go to work and make money. So I looked at the programs, and my strongest advice would be to look at what you want to do. What's your end goal? And then look at the degree that matches your end goal. So you don't want to be overly educated or underly educated, depending on what you want to do. You want to find programs that say, if you're, you want to work with the geriatric population in nursing homes, then call those people. Where'd you go to school? What did you do? What's your background? So work backwards almost. A lot of times people will go and get a degree because it's a title. They want that degree, but that doesn't necessarily fit what they're best at or what they really enjoy doing. And I see that when I'm hiring and reviewing applications. I get the gamut of degrees. I get a huge variance of degrees, things that I've never even thought about. And for me, I can find what their interest level is and what they focus their energies and efforts on is really what's the most telling to me. So degree's a baseline, and then someone who's concentrated their volunteer time or extra studies or has extra research or something, I'll actually end up sorting out my applicants by that information even more so than by degree.
For me, I didn't have that end goal in mind. I didn't know what that was for me, and to some extent I'm still kind of looking for that. But, so I have a bachelor's in psychology, so kind of where you guys are. I knew, and I started as a math major actually, but I took a psychology course and loved it, and realized that I loved the idea of understanding people and how people work, and really went more the social psychology route. I actually didn't like IO Psych at all in undergrad. Ironically, I now have a PhD in that, but I love the social psychology piece. It was about studying those groups of people and how groups interacted. I knew I wasn't, although I really liked cognitive, I wasn't really that one-on-one therapist kind of person. It just wasn't what I wanted to do. And I actually fell into the opportunity to go to Pitt to get my master's degree in education. But it was working more around adult education. So I worked in residential homes for folks with mental retardation. And so there was a specific program at Pitt around dealing with adults with disabilities, because most of the degrees are working with kids, right? Especially in education, it's all about working with kids. So this was about working more with adults. And I took a lot of adult learning classes there, so I really liked that piece too. And to me, it kind of fit with psychology, right? The social psychology of how people work together in groups, but then also how do adults learn? Adults learn very differently from children, so that was really interesting for me. And then I worked for a number of years and decided that I wanted a PhD just to prove to myself that I could do it. It really wasn't, I'm like contradicting everything you said, Holly, I'm sorry. Her advice is really good. I'm not saying go my way. I really did not have a specific career goal. It was more a personal goal for me. And realized that throughout the work that I was doing, so I worked in program evaluation, and then I also added training and development to that. So training staff, again, that adult learning piece. So that piece really fit in there with me. And just decided that administrative track was really what interested me. Maybe not risk management per se, but that's, it comes with the territory. So just researching doctoral degrees and whatnot. I had to do mine online. I had 3 kids at the time that I started and had 4 by the time I finished my PhD. So there was no way I could go to a brick and mortar school. I had to do it online. So one course at a time, I went through the IO doctoral program, and because I liked it, and also because it was, in all honesty, one of the easiest things that I could do based on my previous degrees and my experience. It kind of flowed naturally into that. And once I finished that, which actually was only 5 years ago, so you're never too old to learn, is when I moved to family services now and have this position in organizational development that I really, really like. So I was able to kind of find my way and find something that I liked. I kind of went the opposite of what Holly described.
Different path.
Yeah, a very different path, but it's my path.
So I guess my journey started, I ended up running a lifers group at a state prison as part of like a fun thing to do. And it was kind of one of those opportunities that I like to call the ones that you fall into, that you were like, well, this sounds like something cool to do on an evening. And it ended up being like one of those really profound, like, I have to do this the rest of my life. So I did that, and then I landed an internship at Allegheny County Jail. And from there, I got a job, and I realized that I wanted to specialize in forensics. And so I got my master's degree, and during my master's degree, I had a professor, because in grad school, you end up working with your professors really hands-on because your classes are smaller and they actually get to like know your name, which might be a little bit different. But so I was working with him, and I'm like, my biggest concern about getting a master's degree is eventually you don't work with clients anymore. Like if you're in a prison setting or a jail setting, eventually you'll just end up working up into management, and you just manage other therapists doing their job. And the thought of not being hands-on really bothered me, so I decided that at that point I was going to go on for my doctorate while I still had motivation and still could like sit and read a book at one without responsibilities. Like I don't have 3 kids, so for me, like my dog, I'm like, hey, we're going to hang out and read this book together. So I realized that if I wanted to still do treatment and still have an impact with clients, inmates, whatever you want to say, I knew that this PsyD would be really beneficial for me at this point in my life, and I was still I am motivated to get it, but you have to have that motivation to continue on, because grad school is the biggest commitment that you ever make. I guess with the exception of marriage, maybe. But I think it's one of the bigger commitments you'll ever make, but it's also one of the really beneficial ones. And like when you get your master's degree, you'll be so happy. You're like, look at this. So that's how I kind of ended up in the position I'm in right now. I've switched up my specialization a little bit because I was super specialized in forensics. So I decided about like 6 months ago, I quit my job with the feds. I was doing sex offender work. So I quit that, I went to community work, and I switched into school counseling, which if you would have asked me probably 2 years ago if I would ever consider doing school counseling, I would have laughed at you and walked away because I'm like, ooh, kids, no, like, they do weird things. But it's actually been probably one of the more profound learning experiences. And I didn't go too far out of the criminal justice field with doing the alternative school. However, it's so much different than what I thought it was going to be. So beyond that, I had to switch it up a little bit because I don't want to be on my resume, like you were saying, with all these people having different qualifications and stuff. I didn't want to have all these degrees and then all my experience be just straight criminal justice, because I think that I was worried that I look like just one side of a coin. Like this is all that she can do, and so I switched it up and I'm doing some community work. I'm kind of indifferent about it, but you have to get the experience. So I don't know if that answered that. It was kind of a big circle, but.
Yes.
Being interested in criminal justice, have you ever thought of law school? Because that's what I'm interested in. I'm not sure if that's a path for me.
So I have thought about law school, but I don't think it was a good path for me because I realized the difference in even working a small amount with lawyers, so either turning in psych assessments, like PIAs or MMPI2s to lawyers in the Fed system. You'll get into all that fun stuff. I realized that where our interests for the client were coming from different angles. So when I was working with individuals who have these major sex crimes, right, I was more on like, can we like get through some of this stuff and talk about what's going on with you? Where the lawyer was more on the side of, I want you to get the least amount of jail time as possible. So our interests were and our passion were in different places. So I'm not saying that maybe I could get with the lawyer, and do that. But for me, it really, my passion is on the other side of that. So, not trying to sway you in any direction there, but it does come from different angles. So.
Holly, did you ask me ever do criminal work?
Yeah, my husband's an attorney, and I would caution, law school sounds like a beautiful idea, but look very closely at the placement rates after law school. Look very hard at what career services any law school is going to give you. There is a plethora of lawyers and not a lot of law jobs. So yeah, if you have a passion for working in sex crimes or something like that, those niche markets, absolutely. But sort of a generalist approach can be pretty rough. And the recession hit attorneys probably the hardest of all the markets. So having lived through that and saw it, because law school classes just were decimated in terms of their job prospects. And I think it's changing. So, he's employed and, but one question that I wish that we would have asked a lot more stridently was, what are your job prospects? Who do you place with? How many of your students do you place? Really kind of feet to the fire questions like that.
I think those are good questions for any graduate school, really, their placement rates. And, you know, I can only speak from my experience here at RMU, but I know that when we do our reports, we always break it down, you know, by major, by program, grad versus undergrad. So, you know, I know you see the billboards and you see the 92 or 93 or whatever it is, but if you want to know what it is for a certain major or a certain program, you know, we can definitely provide you with that kind of information. So since we do it the way other schools also do their placement reports, and it's been recommended by NACE, other schools should have that information for you as well. So when you're evaluating grad schools, you know, think about the investment of time and money, think about the placement rates, things of that nature. So that's a good point no matter what program you're looking to go into. But that's just a plug in there for, you know, going to grad school and things you need to evaluate. And I think one of the things that we wanted to talk about with this whole Careers in the Social Sciences Day was helping you guys understand that, you know, grad school for the most part is something that you're going to have to do eventually to work in your fields. Everyone sitting up here has at least a master's degree. I have a master's degree. I'm also kind of in the field, I guess. I was also a social science major and then got a master's, and now I am working as, you know, a career counselor. I'm not a licensed counselor or anything like that, but, you know, these are all the different career paths you can take, and you can see that everyone's different, you know, everyone had a different approach. Nobody had a straight shot necessarily. I mean, Kate and myself were social science majors, and I actually got my master's in organizational studies with a concentration in leadership and employee relations. So there's different ways you can get to your ultimate goal if you happen to have one right now that you're thinking about, or, you know, you can just kind of feel it out, or the opportunities you fall into. I fell into higher education, really, so I was thinking about going to law school or possibly into social work, and then I did my practicum and everything changed. But I also happened to be working part-time here on campus as a work study and realized that my passion was really in higher education and counseling college students. So that's how I found where my path went. But what's a typical day for you guys like?
For me, there's no such thing as a typical day. I walk in 8:30 in the morning and I don't stop till 5, which makes this a really good job for me. If you want, you know, I think people classically think of the clinical field as sort of, you know, drinking tea and talking about issues and reflecting on things, and it's all very deep and thoughtful, and we're kind of fly by the seat of our pants people. You never know what's going to come in. I love that. I thrive on not knowing what's going to come in my door, you know, every day. So some days I'll have administrative meetings. Once a week I'll meet with the care team. I'll have supervision and clinical supervision of the therapists that work for me. And I see clients one-on-one because that's what I love, and that's what I went into this for, so I'm not giving that up. I mean, it just depends. Sometimes I'm working on a crisis all day, and I'm on the phone with the hospital and the police, and, you know, so all sorts of dramatic things happening. And some days it's just sitting in a room with someone trying to figure out how to keep them safe for the next 24 hours and how much support I can give them. And sometimes it's talking about long-term depression. And, you know, I just, wow, there's no typical day. And we sort of joke about it, like, oh, what's today going to bring? And I truly, I have a schedule technically, and boy, oh boy, I love it, but wow, there's just nothing typical about day to day. This semester goes like a blink. I can't believe how fast this semester went. Just because you just go, you hit the ground running and you don't stop, and you kind of go home and go, wait. My husband says, how's work today? And I go, good, I think. Haven't really thought about it. Like, it just didn't have time to process it, but I thrive on that. And I know that if you're not someone, and I've had people, you know, in various jobs that work with me and for me, that if you don't thrive on a high level of organized chaos, then clinical work is probably not the way to go, because you'll always get curveballs. But if you do like that and like the novelty of it and hearing people's stories, then clinical work is a great fit. It's just what you're most comfortable in. If you like routine and, you know, daily predictability, you've got to really think about what kind of career you're going to go into. If it's going to offer you that, if you're going to be miserable every day because you want that routine and predictability, you're not getting it.
I'd say my schedule's similar but different. I don't deal with the individual crises, so I don't have people coming in who've just lost their home or something like that. But my crises might be, we've just had 2 staff in a serious car accident, they're now hospitalized, or our power is out in this building and we use electronic health records, so how are people going to document? It's more that administrative piece, but it's the same as yours in that there is no day that's the same as the one before. I do sit in and run a lot of meetings. I'm on a lot of committees, obviously with risk and compliance and quality. There's a committee for each one of those too. So I run a lot of those, which is always harder than just being the participant in the meeting, because when you're leading the meeting, right, Stacey, you have to have an agenda, and when people don't talk, you have to kind of fill in for that and make things happen, right? There's a lot of facilitation there, so I do have probably more meetings than I care to have at times, because then you can't get to the other work that you have. But every day really is different, and I see myself in my department as the drivers of change. I was hired to make change at the agency, both in culture and just the way that we do things, and change can be very slow. So sometimes that's okay, sometimes it's more frustrating than it should be. Yes, and again, yes, it makes me very unpopular, especially with some of the changes I make. But I also do staff recognition, so they like that side of it. So I try to strike that balance, which that's actually also a big challenge for me. So as risk manager, I'm telling people that they're not allowed to do certain things, and they don't like that. And I was telling the group that I was talking to before that I recently wrote a policy of not allowing appliances in individual offices. We had some people that had like a full-blown kitchen in their office, and that's just not safe. And we literally had a toaster fire at one point. And if someone's not in the office and that toaster catches on fire, guess what? That whole building is going to burn down. And you have clients in that building, you have other staff in that building. So people did not like me for that. But then I was giving out prizes for a door decorating contest. You know, so it can be a real struggle, and I'm sure that people look at me like, what's going on with her? That she's sending this negative thing out and now this positive thing. So it really can be a tricky balance between some of the things that I do. But as far as my schedule goes, Mondays I'm in meetings all day. That's our management meeting day. So that's pretty consistent. Outside of that, it's whenever I can squeeze
literally.
Literally, yes, but my goal as the change agent is to make it more preventive and less reactive. Putting out the fires is very reactive, and that's a lot of money. But that's what happens when you have crises, right? You have to react to that. So you have to have that reaction piece, but we also want to have that preventive piece so that people aren't constantly just working to put out fires, because that's exhausting. Very exhausting.
So I'm the employee that has the kitchen. So I guess my life is pretty much weekly and not daily, because I never know quite what I'm going to do day in and day out. Most of Mondays, Tuesdays, and half-day Thursdays, I'm at the CHS office, and I'll be out in the community a little bit, but most of my time is spent in meetings. And I feel like that's a lot of community work is meetings, because we have to be on the same page. And our department is new because we're housing, part of my department is housing homeless families in Allegheny County in hotels, and it has been quite the little adventure with the state budget not being passed. And we are like 250,000 back right now. So once that gets passed, you'll learn all about state funding and how important that is when they don't do their job, how it affects us. But at the school, I'm way more of a therapist there, which is really what I kind of prefer doing. Meetings are a lot of fun. It's a great way to check your emails and be on top with your team members. I'm also one of those employees that are like, hold on a second, let me answer this person back. So at the school setting, I do a lot of, all of the kids there have individual education plans, and they all have some type of behavioral issue going along with that. basically the whole school, every kid's IEP plan has either ODD or conduct on their paperwork. So we're looking at more of an environmental issue than even like an individual child issue. So I put out a lot of fires as far as if a child is destroying a classroom, having a bad day, something like that, I'll walk into the room and try to de-escalate them, or I'll walk them outside, do that kind of stuff. I don't really break up fights, one, because it can be relatively dangerous to get involved in something like that, but I will like circumvent fights. I'm like, oh no, like walk this way with me, and like kind of walk them away from the area. So it's a lot of being in a crisis and making a quick 30-second decision on how we're gonna handle this situation, which is way more exciting. You guys are all like, oh my God, that sounds terrible, but it's actually kind of exciting because people react. Like if you show a little bit of interest in like redirecting them. The one situation that comes up in my mind, last week I had a kid that I work with every day walk out of area and flip the desk and was like punching a window, and I just walk up to him and I was like, did you watch the hockey game last night? And he like stops and starts talking to me, and so we walked around the hallway, we went and got a drink, like did all this other stuff, and I got him back into his classroom and he spent the rest of the day in there. So, and it might have taken me 45 minutes to have this situation calm down, but the reality of it is he went back in the classroom and finished his homework and then went home for the day, and that's a success story because, you know, it might seem very minor, but you know, we're not going to suspend him for that. He's having a rough day. There's, you know, everybody has rough days. Some of us just express it in different ways. And then outside of those two places, I also go to school in the evening for about 10 hours a week. So that's grad school in itself. You will find that you sit in classrooms, and the master's classes are a little bit different. They're a little bit bigger, and you can kind of pick and choose what kind of classes you want. This semester has been relatively difficult because I have diagnostic, which is basically you memorize the DSM and you memorize it, and then you take quizzes on what you learned that week, which doesn't seem as much fun as it may be. And then I also have statistics, which doesn't get any easier the older you get. So I was actually telling Stacy on the hallway, I'm like, I hate this class. Because it's statistics, you have to take it. You have to understand when you're doing research. So, but most weeks I'm like excited for Friday to come, and but then I start Monday and I like love what I'm doing, so I wouldn't change it. I would appreciate not working like 60 hours a week, but it happens. I'll get through it. So,
What other questions do you guys have?
So you said that you are studying the DSM in grad school, right?
yes.
Okay, so it's like we just learned about what that was like 2 days ago, and I know it has 5 axes.
So the old DSM does, yeah.
Oh, wow, okay. So how do you study that then?
So that's a really good question. So basically, each week we get a different section. So this past week has been substance use disorders, and you study what each of those are, and then you memorize the specifiers for each of them. And without getting into a lot of detail, it gets a lot easier because a lot of it starts making sense. So for like bipolar, a lot of that makes sense. Once you learn the specifiers and all of that stuff. And you will learn that because you'll be able to put clients that you meet out in the world you'll be able to match it up, if that makes any sense. So a lot of the time when I'm memorizing through, because I spent some time as a drug and alcohol counselor, so this week I was like, oh, that's that guy from, like, this makes sense, and I'm able to memorize it that way. So you'll get there, I promise. It sounds really scary, but it's like every day at a time, and one day you'll wake up and you're like, I know all this information, and yay me. I'm like really good at Trivial Pursuit. So, yeah.
I know you were talking about you meet with clients, and is that like students on campus, or so you just like when they're having a difficult time with being away or just being in a college, setting and being on their own, just kind of there for them to come and talk to
Well, our counseling center has a couple, 4 right now, but different functions. And one is we have an outreach and crisis counselor who, just your average bad day, you just need to vent, don't know what to do about a profession that's driving you crazy, you can walk in and see her. That's something that I consider probably one of our biggest priorities, is being there in the moment when somebody needs us. And then therapeutically, we see students who have, I don't say bigger issues, but more long-term issues that we can see them ongoing. So more typical clinical relationship where we see them weekly. We have a psychiatrist on campus that comes. And so it's the traditional, plus a lot more of the outreach and the boots on the ground kind of thing, as well as we have some grants that we manage, and we have an online wellness coach with young men students. Any more questions?
How did you end up getting a job at the Oliver's US Chapter? How did you get into that?
So that's another one of those situations that I kind of fell into. So school counseling jobs are really hard to come by in the city of Pittsburgh. So just word to the wise, make a good impression at your internships. That's like the best way I can say that. But I was originally at Westinghouse, and I went over to Oliver for a meeting because Oliver is split into the special education school and Oliver Citywide. And I happened to walk into the wrong door with my colleague, who's also was at Westinghouse, and she happened to know the principal there. And the principal's like, we have to set up a meeting and, work some stuff out. And we got invited to come over there instead of being at Westinghouse. And it was a pretty good decision on my part. Westinghouse was a lot of fun to work in, but I was doing a lot of observation of classrooms and not doing hands-on, pulling kids out of class, doing kind of crisis management and that. So I would like to say my way of falling into careers have not been like the traditional way. It's usually like just having coffee with somebody and be like, you should come over and like have a meeting with us. Yeah. And I end up falling into that kind of position. But as far as that goes, if anybody's interested in school psychology and has some clearances and that kind of stuff, you might be able to come in for a day and chat with me if you're interested. Definitely at the homeless shelter, the homeless place, you can come in and chat at what we do. But the school is a little bit different. But yeah, it's interesting. It's not a traditional school counseling job in the least. So, but yeah.
And what Kate just mentioned is what we call networking in the Career Center. And that's really an important piece. And actually, before this session, when Kate first came on campus today, we talked a lot about how important internships were and how Pittsburgh is such a small city. We're a big city, but it's a small city, and we're very lucky to have a lot of various nonprofits and schools and school systems. But the thing is, we all know each other. Kate and I graduated 6-7 years apart from each other, and I just happened to be her career counselor at the time. But, when Dr. Harold and I were planning this day, she was one of the first people I reached out to, because I knew where her career path had taken her, and I knew what she had been up to. And, she knows a lot of people in various positions throughout the city and in different school systems, as do I. And that's why you never want to burn any bridges, and you want to be responsible and cognizant in your internships and in your practicums to know that that's how you get your foot in the door, because employers, they want to see your body of work. They want to know what you can do, and they don't want to have to kind of take a chance on things. So sometimes, it's important, like Holly was saying, where were these people's passions? Where was their volunteer work? What is setting them apart? So that's why it's so important to really reflect on and participate in internships and volunteer work, to make those networking contacts and make it clear on your resume to what you're really looking for and what you're capable of to someone.
Yeah, I think, even in the field in general, I started out at Presley Ridge and then went on to Western Psych, and each job that I've gotten has been through networking, pure and simple networking. This job, I just happen to know somebody who knows somebody who talked to the right person, and having done this for a long time, Pittsburgh's a city, but if you burn a bridge in Pittsburgh, it will follow you, because it's a network within a network. And I I've seen so many people have just a bad interaction and not really handle it well, and it blow up for a long time. But I've also had people that were in a, worked with someone that I knew was tough to work with and handled it well, and that bumped them right up in my book because they were able to deal with it, they were able to get through it. And so kind of knowing people, knowing the effect that you have on the people around you, knowing that even the receptionist in the office where you work has an impression of you, and her brother's sister's daughter maybe, it's amazing, who knows who in the city. But everybody that you come into contact with has a professional opinion of you. And in a city like Pittsburgh, I think it's really important. I have a friend who's a therapist in Manhattan, and I've sort of thought, like, no way, forget it. Nobody just, oh no, we're a community within a community, and we all know, they kind of share interns through, and they all sort of know each other. So even in Manhattan, if you burn a bridge, you've got to figure out how to make amends or really explain that burned bridge. But if you work through it, some situation
for 7 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Think about risk management in your career path.
And I'll tell you, David, if you don't mind me sharing, I'll tell you the way I got here was I brought my son, who's a senior in high school, to Discovery Days over the summer. And he's more interested in business, but I said, I want to stop by the psych table and just see what they offer there. And I met David Wheeler, started talking, and now he and I stay in contact, and I got suckered into sitting up here today. So you never know. I never would have thought in a million years that I would come to Discovery Day, which was about my son, and meet a good connection on my own. So it really is, you never know who you're going to meet or who they know.
Social media, I'm sure you guys have that drummed into you, but please, please, please think about your social media presence. Think about the things that you say and that you do. They don't disappear. I don't myself because I'm not that savvy with it, but I've had employers that will check on social media. It's really something you have to consider and consider strongly. And the message doesn't seem to be getting out so well, and there's still some people capturing themselves with not their greatest moments on social media, and you'd rather not be in the position to have to explain that away. If you want to go into clinical work with adolescents and you've got a social media trail of all sorts of terrible behaviors as an adolescent, you don't want to be sitting there and hearing, wow. You want to be able to present who you want to present in that moment, in that office. So please be cognizant on some level of social media.
Any other questions before we wrap up? All right, well, thank you, ladies, for coming to meeting panelists. You're welcome to stay and mill about, but that's our session for today. Oh, Dr.
Well, just wanted to say Sharon has offered to stay for the next hour or so. So she already talked to a few of you about careers and resumes and interviews or whatever. So even if you don't have your resume with you, even if you aren't ready to do a mock interview, just stay after and talk with her.
I also have some information packets from Carlo on their master's program and doc program, if anybody is interested.
All right, thank you.